You think you deserve a medal for this? Denise said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. He's our father too. I was standing in Dad's kitchen at 11 at night, still in my scrubs from a 12-hour shift, holding a pill organizer in one hand and a phone in the other, trying to explain to my sister why I hadn't answered her texts for 6 hours. 6 hours in which I'd driven Dad to the ER for chest pains, sat with him while they ran an EKG, held his hand when he panicked because he couldn't remember what year it was, and then brought him home and fed him dinner at 9 p.m., because that's when we finally got back. And Denise wanted to know why I hadn't called her back. I was a little busy, Denise, I said. You always say that, like the rest of us don't have problems. That was the night I almost laughed, except nothing about it was funny. Because 2 years earlier, when Dad's diagnosis first came down, Denise had said word for word, "I just can't handle watching him decline, Rachel. You're stronger than me." Michael had said something similar. "You're closer, it just makes sense." Nobody voted. Nobody sat down at a table and divided responsibilities. It just became mine, the way water finds the lowest point in a room. What none of them knew, what I hadn't told a single person, was what Dad had said to me 3 weeks before that call, sitting in his recliner, with a clarity that came and went like weather. He'd looked at me and said, "Rachel, I know what they're going to do, and I've already made sure they can't do it." I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet, but I would. Backstory setup. My name is Rachel Kowalski. I'm 38 years old. I've worked as a labor and delivery nurse at St. Vincent's Regional for 11 years, and until 3 years ago, I had what I thought was a manageable life. A husband, Tom. 2 kids, Ben and Sophie, 12 and 9. A house 15 minutes from my father's place in Maple Heights, a suburb outside Cleveland where I grew up. My father, Frank Kowalski, was 74 when it started. A retired machinist, a widower. My mother, Carol, had passed from ovarian cancer 9 years earlier, and a man who prided himself on never needing help from anybody, which made it almost funny, in a bitter way, that he ended up needing more help than any of us knew how to give. It started small. Dad forgetting to pay the electric bill 3 months running, even though there was money sitting right there in his checking account. Dad calling me at 2 a.m. because he thought someone had broken into his garage, and when I drove over, there was nothing there. No broken lock, no missing tools, nothing except my father, standing in his driveway in his bathrobe, confused and frightened by a threat that didn't exist. The diagnosis came in March of 2023, mixed vascular dementia, compounded by a series of small, silent strokes his doctor called cumulative cerebral events. Dr. Patricia Yun explained it to us, all 3 of us actually, because in the very beginning, we did all show up together, that Dad's decline would likely be gradual but unpredictable, that he'd have good days and terrifying days, and that at some point, probably sooner than we wanted to admit, he would need supervision essentially around the clock. I remember sitting in that consultation room. Michael, my older brother, 42, an operations manager who lived 40 minutes away in Strongsville, kept checking his phone. Denise, 35, a marketing coordinator who'd moved to Columbus for a job 2 years before, kept saying, okay, so what do we do?" in a voice that suggested she already knew her answer would be, "Not much." Nobody assigned me the role of primary caregiver. I want to be clear about that, because it matters for everything that came later. There was no family meeting where we divided up days of the week, no agreement about splitting costs, nothing on paper. What happened instead was a slow accumulation of small yeses on my part, and small no's on theirs, until one day I looked up and realized I was the only one left standing. It started with doctor's appointments. "Rachel, you're a nurse. You'll understand what they're saying better than I would," Denise said the first time she skipped one. Then it was medication management. Dad was on 9 different prescriptions by the end of that year. Blood thinners and blood pressure medication, and an antipsychotic for the sundowning that came with the dementia. And someone needed to organize a pill box every single week. Someone needed to call the pharmacy. Someone needed to notice when a refill hadn't come in. That someone was always me. Then it was groceries. Then it was the lawn, which Dad could no longer safely mow. So I hired a service and paid for it out of my own pocket, because splitting 3 ways over a $45 lawn service felt petty to bring up, and I didn't want to be the one who made things petty. Then it was the day Dad left the stove on and nearly burned down his kitchen, and after that, someone had to check on him daily, and the someone conversation happened over a group text that went like this: "Me. We need a real plan. I can't keep driving over there every day after 12-hour shifts. Michael, I've got the Henderson project through Q3. It's insane right now. Denise, I'm literally 3 hours away. What do you want me to do, Rachel?" Me. I don't know. Something. You're the one who's always been closest to him anyway. That last line stuck with me because it wasn't even true in the way she meant it. I wasn't Dad's favorite. I was just the nurse. I was just the one whose job made me understand medical things. I was just the one who didn't move away. By the fall of 2023, my life looked like this. I'd wake at 5:30, get Ben and Sophie ready for school, drop them off, work a 12-hour shift at the hospital, drive straight to Dad's house to make sure he'd eaten, taken his pills, hadn't wandered off, hadn't fallen. I'd get home around 8:30 most nights, help with homework I'd missed, fall into bed, and do it again. Tom, God bless him, took on more of the parenting than he ever expected to, but even he started saying things like, "Rosh, I miss you. I feel like I'm co-parenting with a ghost." I quietly reduced my hours at the hospital from full-time to a 0.7 FTE, which cost me about $14,000 a year in lost income, plus my seniority track toward a charge nurse position I'd been eyeing for 2 years. Nobody in my family asked about that cost. Nobody offered to cover it. I paid for Dad's grocery delivery service, his lawn care, and eventually a portion of a part-time home health aide, Marisol, who came 3 afternoons a week at $22 an hour, money that came out of my household budget, not a shared account, because there was no shared account. There was just me, writing checks, and my siblings, 3 hours and 40 minutes away respectively, sending sympathetic texts. "I don't know how you do it," Denise wrote once. "You're a saint." I didn't feel like a saint. I felt like someone standing alone in a house that was slowly filling with water, watching everyone else stay dry. Rising conflict. The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday in June of 2024. I remember the date because it was 2 days before Sophie's 9th birthday party, and I had spent the previous evening blowing up balloons at 10 p.m. after getting back from Dad's. At 6:47 a.m., my phone rang. It was Marisol. "Rachel, you need to come now. Your father fell in the bathroom. He's not moving right, and he's saying strange things." I called 911 from the car, driving faster than I should have, and by the time I got to Dad's house, the ambulance was already there. He'd fallen and hit his head on the edge of the tub. There was blood. Head wounds always bleed dramatically. I know that as a nurse, but knowing it professionally and seeing it on your own father's temple are 2 entirely different experiences. At the hospital, they ran a CT scan. Subdural hematoma. Small, not requiring surgery, but requiring 48 hours of observation and a neurology consult. I sat in that hospital room for the entire first day, canceling my shift, calling Tom to handle the birthday party alone, and I texted the group chat at 9 a.m. Me. "Dad fell. He's at St. Vincent's. Small brain bleed. They're keeping him for observation. I could use some backup here." Michael responded 4 hours later. "Oh no. Keep us posted. I have back-to-back meetings today, but let me know if it's serious." Denise didn't respond until that evening. Gee, is he okay? I would come, but I have Sophie's. Wait, no. That's your Sophie, lol. I have a work thing Thursday. I can't move. Keep me posted. Nobody came. Not that day, not the next. I sat in a vinyl hospital chair for 2 nights, sleeping in intervals, watching my father's monitor, translating medical jargon for him, when he woke up confused and scared, holding a hospital-grade emesis basin, when the concussion made him nauseous, advocating with the attending when I felt his pain management wasn't being addressed quickly enough. I did all of this alone, in my nurse's brain and my daughter's heart simultaneously, both halves screaming. When Dad was discharged, I brought him home, adjusted his medication schedule to account for the new blood thinner precautions post-head injury, and increased Marisol's hours, which cost more money. Money I again paid alone. 3 days later, I finally broke down and called Denise directly. No more group texts, because I needed to actually talk about this like adults. I need help, I said. Not sympathy. Help. I need someone to take even 1 day a week. I need someone to help with the aid costs. I am drowning. There was a pause, and then Denise said the words that I will remember for the rest of my life. Rachel, nobody asked you to be a martyr. You chose this. You've always wanted to be the responsible one, the one everybody depends on. That's not our fault. Don't put that on us now. I sat in my car in my own driveway, engine off, and cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry in months. You wanted to do this, she said again, like a chorus. You could have said no. Could I have? Maybe. But somebody had to say yes, and everyone else had already said no, in 100 small ways before I ever said anything at all. Michael's version of the same argument came a week later, over the phone, when I raised the subject of splitting costs. By then I'd spent, by my own accounting, just over $31,000 out of pocket over 18 months on aid services, medical co-pays, home modifications like grab bars and a shower chair, and the informal lawn and groceries fund that had ballooned into something much bigger. Look, Rach, I'm not saying you're wrong to want help, Michael said, but I've got my own mortgage, my own kids' college funds. I can't just start writing checks because you decided to take this on. I didn't decide, I said. I was the only one left. That's not fair, he said. No, I said, it isn't. That was the last time either of them offered even the pretense of shared responsibility. From that point forward, it was understood, without anyone saying it outright, that Dad's care was my problem, my cost, my life to reshape. And it was also understood, apparently, that I had no right to complain about a burden I had, according to them, chosen for myself. Climax-betrayal reveal here is where the story turns, and where I need you to understand something about how quickly things can change when money enters the picture. In January of 2025, Dad had another health scare. A mild stroke this time, thankfully with minimal lasting impact, beyond some slurred speech that mostly resolved with therapy. But it was serious enough that Dr. Yun sat me down and said the words I'd been dreading. Rachel, it's time to start thinking seriously about long-term arrangements. Frank cannot live alone safely anymore, even with a part-time aide. I began researching memory care facilities. The good ones in our area ran between $6,500 and $8,200 a month. Dad had savings, about $340,000 from his pension and the sale of a rental property he and Mom had owned, and a house worth roughly $210,000. Not a fortune, but enough that this conversation, the second I mentioned it in the family group chat, changed the entire temperature of my relationship with my siblings. Within 48 hours, Denise called me, not texted, called. So there's a house, she said, and savings. What's the plan for all of that? I explained that most of it would likely go toward Dad's care costs going forward, that memory care wasn't cheap, that we needed to think realistically about how long that $340,000 would last. Right. But after, Denise said, I mean, eventually, what happens to what's left? I remember feeling something cold settle in my stomach. Denise, he's not dead. We're talking about his care. I know that, she snapped. I'm just saying, we should talk about this like adults. Get everything organized. Michael thinks so too. It turned out Michael and Denise had already been talking, without me, about the estate. They'd apparently looked into Ohio inheritance law. They'd apparently discussed, between the two of them, whether Dad's will, which none of us had seen updated in over a decade, still reflected an equal three-way split. Then, 3 weeks later, came the moment that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Michael showed up at Dad's house unannounced on a Sunday afternoon while Marisol was there. He asked her a series of questions: how much medication Dad was on, whether he seemed out of it most days, whether he'd ever seemed afraid of me. Marisol, confused and uncomfortable, called me immediately after he left. 2 days later, I got a certified letter. Michael and Denise had contacted an elder law attorney and were formally requesting a review of my financial conduct regarding Dad's accounts, citing what they called concerns about undue influence and potential financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. I sat at my kitchen table reading that letter 3 times before the words made sense together. They were accusing me of elder abuse. Me, the one who had spent 2 years of my life, thousands of hours, over $31,000 of my own money, and every ounce of energy I had left after 12-hour hospital shifts, keeping our father safe, medicated, fed, and loved. "You have no right to control everything," Denise said when I called her, shaking, demanding an explanation. "Dad's vulnerable. You have access to his accounts. How do we even know you haven't been taking money?" "I have every receipt," I said. "Every single one." "That's what someone would say if they were covering their tracks," she said. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her how. Exactly. 2 years of silence. Of, "I'm too busy." Of, "You wanted this," had suddenly transformed into a legal accusation the moment there was money on the table. But some small, exhausted part of me already knew the answer. This was never about concern for Dad. This was about making sure that whatever was left, they'd get their third, without ever having contributed a cent, a visit, or a sleepless night to earn it. Turn now. Twist. I want to tell you that I panicked. I did. For about a day. And then something in me went very quiet and very focused, the way it does in the hospital when a delivery suddenly turns into an emergency and there's no time left for fear. I called an elder law attorney myself, a woman named Attorney Diane Castellano, recommended by a coworker whose family had gone through something similar. I brought her everything, every single receipt from Marisol's aid services, dating back to March of 2023. Every pharmacy statement showing I'd paid out of pocket for medication copays. Bank statements showing the money moving from my account to Dad's expenses, never the other direction. A spreadsheet I'd kept, half out of habit as a nurse who documents everything, half out of some instinct I didn't fully understand at the time, logging every appointment, every fall, every medication change, every hour of care provided, going back nearly 2 years. I also had something my siblings didn't know existed, a durable power of attorney for healthcare and finances that Dad had signed, in front of a notary, at his own request, back in April of 2023, naming me, specifically, as his agent. He'd done it quietly, at the same appointment where his neurologist confirmed he still had legal capacity to make that decision. Dr. Yun had documented, in his medical record, an explicit capacity assessment on that date, stating that Frank Kowalski understood the nature and consequences of the document he was signing. That was what he'd meant, that night in his recliner. "I've already made sure they can't do it." Attorney Castellano requested a formal capacity evaluation be added to the file, current as of that month, and Dr. Yun conducted it herself. Her written assessment was blunt. Frank showed no signs of exploitation, appeared emotionally secure and well cared for, and when asked directly, in a recorded session, how he felt about his daughter Rachel's role in his life, he said this, word for word, according to the transcript. "Rachel gave up everything for me. My other 2 children have called twice this year. If anyone's been exploited around here, it's her, not me." When Michael and Denise's attorney received our response, the documentation, the power of attorney, the capacity evaluation, the 2 years of financial records showing money flowing only from me to Dad, never the reverse, the elder abuse concern evaporated within a week. There was no investigation opened. There couldn't be. The facts didn't support even a preliminary inquiry. But the moment that actually broke something open wasn't legal. It was personal. Attorney Castellano suggested a mediated family meeting, mostly to prevent years of estrangement, and Dad insisted on being there. He sat in his recliner, the same one from that night, and when Denise tried to say, gently, that she just wanted to make sure everything was fair for everyone, Dad raised his hand, something he rarely had the strength to do quickly anymore, and said, "Fair? You want to talk about fair?" The room went silent. Fair would have been you showing up when I fell and split my head open. Fair would have been either of you paying $1 toward Marisol's wages. Fair would have been a phone call that wasn't about my house or my money. Rachel didn't take anything from this family. She's the only reason there's anything left to argue about. Denise started to cry. Michael stared at the floor, and I sat there, exhausted and strangely hollow, not triumphant so much as simply, finally, seen. Resolution Dad passed away 8 months later, in October of 2025, peacefully, in a memory care facility he'd transitioned to, once his needs exceeded what even a home health aide could safely manage. I was with him. Neither Michael nor Denise made it in time. Though to be fair, it happened quickly, and I don't say that with the bitterness I once would have. When his will was read, updated, it turned out, in that same April 2023 appointment when he'd signed the power of attorney, it reflected something none of us expected in exact terms, though I think, by then, none of us were surprised either. He'd left 60% of his estate to me. In recognition, the will stated plainly, of the extraordinary care, sacrifice, and devotion provided by my daughter Rachel during my illness, without which I would not have lived as long, as safely, or as well as I did. The remaining 40% was split between Michael and Denise. Michael didn't contest it. Denise, to her credit, called me a month later, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years, and said, "I think I knew, the whole time, that we weren't doing enough. It was easier to be angry at you than to feel guilty about that." I don't know if that's forgiveness exactly. I don't know if I've fully forgiven either of them, but I've stopped needing them to understand what those 2 years cost me, because I have the proof, and more importantly, I have Dad's own words, spoken while he still could, telling me I mattered. I think about caregiving differently now than I did before all of this started. Nobody puts a value on it while it's happening. There's no invoice for the nights you don't sleep, the promotions you don't take, the birthday parties you miss balloons for because you were sitting in a hospital chair instead. It's invisible labor, right up until someone else wants a piece of what that labor protected, and then, suddenly, everyone remembers there was ever anything worth having. If you are the one holding the pill organizer at 11 at night, while your siblings send sympathetic texts from 3 hours away, I want you to hear this. Keep every receipt. Document everything, not because you'll need to defend yourself in court, though you might, but because someday, you may need to prove to yourself, as much as anyone else, that what you gave was real, and that it mattered, even if the people who should have thanked you never quite managed to say the words. Dad said them instead, and in the end, that was enough.